thanks for still being here. It's getting late. You've been running through a couple of presentations and lots of videos. I promise I have 0 videos. It's all slides. Let me talk about where we're coming from and where we're heading and how we even got here. You all remember this Talking Heads song about how did we get here? Sometimes when I look at the internet, that's exactly how I feel. How did this internet that was so much promising end up turning into what it is now? But let's look back how it was before the internet. Some of you may be old enough to remember some of these things. We had all these silos, CompuServe, AOL, BTX in Germany, and things like that, that we were using to communicate with each others, but we could not communicate across the borders of these services. So sending an email from AOL to CompuServe did not really work well, or not at all. All the content was in silos, so it was stuck in what these companies running these services controlled. Then came the internet. And why did it change everything? Because it is based on open protocols that nobody owns, and we get open and free implementations of these protocols, meaning we can download software freely from somewhere and fire up a computer, launch the service that we want, the web service, a mail service, a DNS service, whatever you name it, and be part of the overall internet. That also implies a few things that are worth mentioning. One is called federation, meaning that your service gets included in this big service mesh and is available to everyone immediately. So open is not enough, but federated is important. And the third parameter is important. It's called permissionless, meaning you don't have to ask anybody, including the creator of the protocol, the creator of the software, or whomever, to participate. You just do it. And that created a lot of beautiful things that make us waste our lives even more. I guess the big revolution of mobile phones was really that we now finally had an internet screen that we could take everywhere. Before we had to sit in front of a computer and do our stuff, but now, I know about you, but the first thing in the morning, what do you do when you're sitting on the toilet? I guess we all are doing that, are we? Right? So we spend 24/7, more or less, when we're not sleeping at least, staring at the screens. And if you look at these numbers, that's the internet minute. So we send 187 million emails in 1 minute. I guess 186 million are spam, but the 1 million may be good stuff. But I mean, you might think that actually the real-time chat programs are the ones that we use the most. The answer is no, it's still good old email. And email is good and old because it is federated, open, and permissionless. It's a good service. Now, WhatsApp and these things are sort of going halfway back. What has also happened on top of our wonderful open internet is that very few companies, and Nico called them GAFA, I would still call them GAFAM and include Microsoft at the very end. Because you've seen in the presentation that Microsoft is pretty strong in search and LinkedIn social networks and so forth. And you've seen this picture of how Microsoft uses all these different services that they provide to collect data about you. So now what makes Microsoft different from Facebook in that sense? I mean, if you run Windows 10, look at how much data is being sent home to Microsoft for that specific reason. So to me, it's GAFAM, and that's just fine. But what's a little discouraging is how these very few companies control more or less everything of our internet minute. Now, some call that surveillance capitalism or something like that. I call it monopolies. Monopolies are great for the ones inside the monopoly. You make a ton of money, and you control what's going on. If you're not part of that monopoly, if you're outside, and excuse my French here, it's not so great. Because monopolies are counter-innovative, even though they do great things. But eventually, when you're in that position, you're not going to innovate a whole lot anymore because now you're controlling that market. But monopolies also create ecosystems that are not healthy. And we've seen a lot of that. 2 pictures. This one I like a lot And it's like a painting from 1700, right, this setting. Who is that? It's Jack Dorsey, the Twitter guy. And the guy who's jumping around the corner is Alex Jones, you know, a super right-wing a-hole, which was thrown off Twitter just a few days before this picture was taken. And Dorsey, I think, was in front of Congress or something and come walking out. I mean, look at this guy with Google Glass in the back. I mean, he almost jumped in it from a decade ago, I guess, you know, trying to look cool, this guy. And I don't know about this guy. He actually looks like my chairman of the board, Richard Zeibt. He looks pretty much the same way. I mean, what this expresses to me is what happens if one company controls the flow of information as much as Twitter does, or Facebook for that matter. Because what these companies are optimized for is to make us stay on the platform as long as possible and come back as often as possible. And when you look at your phone statistics, how often you're using things like Twitter or Facebook, you'll say, yeah, they're doing a pretty good job. Now, that unfortunately plays against the worst of us apes, which we still are. Right? We get distracted by shiny objects and we do stupid stuff, exposing our private data everywhere just to get this shiny thing. This shiny thing is that we want to play against our confirmation bias. We want to hear what we want to hear, and more of it, and we want to get confirmation of this. We want to see catastrophes, right? We want to see bad things because this is how we get excited. And of course, what does a platform optimize for? All the AI stuff and machine learning, to play us things that make us come back, which is exactly those bad things that I mentioned before. And thus, these things optimize for the worst in us human beings, and creating what to me these days feels very poorly. Also, as we don't see it, you know, shiny objects, but we don't see what's behind it, that all our data gets collected and put into this machine that creates almost a virtual copy of ourselves that is smarter than we are ourselves, because there's lots of virtual copies of all of us. And so if I start behaving in a certain way, somebody else might have done that already before me and then done something else. And now the machine can predict what I'm going to do next. The Chinese, of course, and that's why I call it surveillance communism, have almost the same goals, but for different reasons. The one side, Silicon Valley model, is building monopolies to make a ton of money. And you have to gain control over what's going on. The Chinese built these surveillance systems to retain the power, the central power that they have. You know, this is not communism. I mean, I'm not sure China calls itself a communist country anymore, but it's maybe the new version of it. It's certainly a central dictatorship, you know, that defines what's being seen and what's not seen. In a way, Silicon Valley and China are the same. You know, you build platforms to centralize control. The one makes you money, the other one retains or keeps you in power. So what surveillance capitalism gave us is an animated poop emoji, right? That's pretty cool. It gives us the drugs that we need to sort of feed us with the information that we want. But really, it has taken away the internet that we liked. And that creates, in my world, a huge opportunity that you should all have a closer look at. Because there must be another wave of internet that's different again. If you look at industrial revolutions, and we heard that today, you know, from what was his name, Johannes, I think, from Finland, where he said that industrial revolutions, you know, create this break in increasing wages, where they go off the chart from the productivity that's created. They also create monopolies. Whenever you look at new technology having been invented, there was always a monopoly. I mean, Henry Ford owned the car market. I mean, 98% of it. He was the richest man in the world. He was Jeff Bezos of his time. But then look how many car companies we got now. So something happened, and I totally expect that to happen again. And I think we need to make it happen to avoid, you know, living off of this. Now, let's go back to what made the internet strong. What was it? It was based on open protocols, open and free implementations of those, a federated architecture, and permissionless access. So why don't we start building the next wave of services on the internet based on these principles? And the principle is best summarized under the term open source, even though open source really only means you put the source code out there under an accepted license, but it means much more. It means all these other things as well, because open source people tend to also build federated permissionless services and protocols. They don't try to lock you in. Now, let's categorize this. You saw, again, from Johannes, his slide where he said sort of lame companies and cool companies. You know what the parameters are? To just put this picture over this picture here, the monopolies try to do all this. They try to lock you in. They try to keep you there, never let you out again. They're like the old Eagles song, Hotel California. You know that? The punchline is, you can always check out, but you can never leave. Right? You got the music in your ear. Well, it was about drugs, obviously, but these are our drugs, right? This is our drug. You know, like I said, you know, I think Nico said that. Nico said, you know, I really like the products of GAFAM or GAFA too much. You know, I kind of want to leave, but it's so hard because all my data stays there. This is terrible, right? And this is because they do what is said here. They're trying to lock you in. I mean, have you ever heard of a bookshelf, you know, that you have to throw away and buy all new books when you buy a new bookshelf? This is what Amazon Kindle is. So you buy all your books on Amazon, all your e-books. They're DRM'd. You can only look at them on your Kindle bookshelf. So if you buy another e-reader or you decide you don't like Amazon anymore, right, you're going to lose your books if you close your account. I mean, it's crazy. You paid money for it. How about music? I mean, how many of you have still control over their MP3 libraries? We've kind of, very good. It's like 3.5% of the room. Right? The problem is we get Spotify or Apple Music. It's so convenient, right? Hotel California, Sunshine, Caipirinha, whatever. Problem is, when you leave Spotify, boom, here goes your music library. That is not very good. So if you now imagine the market opportunity. Let's build all these cool services, but this way, the cool company way. Open, federated, no lock-in. I mean, we've got nothing to lose in a way, almost, right? Because we in Europe, we're so far behind in many ways. I mean, yeah, we got Spotify. That's good, right? We've got a couple of cool Finnish companies, by the way. One joined us a while ago, Dovecut. The Dovecut email server is used by 75% of all email servers in the world, and it's been 3 people when they joined us, right? So there is all this somewhere, but why do we always look at either the surveillance capitalism or the surveillance communism for innovation? Why are we afraid of Silicon Valley or China when it comes to AI? I think what we can do is unleash the power of cooperation and maybe also our culture. You know, the European culture is very much based on humanitarian beliefs. So we want everybody to be healthy. We want everybody to participate and get an education. You know, surveillance capitalism and surveillance communism doesn't really care about the individual well-being. Now, if we build platforms that do care about the individual well-being, that retain the ownership of the data that's created in the services with us, with the users. Why is all my behavioral data on the internet owned by either Google or Facebook? Why, did they really ask me? Did you really read their terms and conditions ever? I mean, have you tried when you fire up a new iPhone, you know, they come up with these terms and conditions. Have you ever tried to even scroll all the way down? I mean, no way. So they've never asked us, really, because they made it incomprehensible and undigestible. But still, they're doing all these things with our data, which more or less defines how we're going to live our lives as we move forward. So now, let's build services that do all these cool things. Let's build them together as an open community, because that's how open source works. You put out your work, a couple of people get interested, and look at them, interact with it, give feedback, maybe even add stuff to it. You put it into a new release, you put it out there again, more people get interested, and now rinse and repeat. This is why open source software, by the way, has taken over the infrastructure software world, for example. I mean, there's no database, no serious operating system out there. I mean, even Microsoft runs Linux on Azure, right? So that should tell you enough. Linux is running the world, you know, the MySQL, MongoDB, Dovecut, you know, 75% of all email servers, Power DNS also from us, 40–50% of all DNS servers in the world. You're just creating the best software in the world, the most secure software in the world. And now if we build services on top of those, we can create what I call trustable services. I only have 4 commandments. We saw 10 from Microsoft, so I'm a little more humble. Now, how can you define what a trustable service is? And it's super simple. Number 1 is it must be available from more than one provider. Because if there's only one provider, you have no choice. Right? You can't move away. You have no pricing power as a consumer. And you're locked in, because there's nowhere to take your data. I mean, you can download your Facebook data. Who of you has ever downloaded the Facebook data? Not so many. And then you get a big pile of stuff, right? And you have no software that allows you to run that stuff. I mean, you have a static HTML file, basically. So all the functionality of Facebook has disappeared. You have a dead copy of your data, and you can't really make much sense of that data without the software. So number 1, aside from, that's commandment number 2, being able to move your data from one service to the other, the software of the service must be available. Because otherwise, the data is dead, unless it's a highly standardized data, like an email, for example. I mean, how many of you have their email from 20 years back? That's quite a few, because you can. Because it's an open standard, an open file format. You can move from one provider to another. If provider A goes broke, you just go to provider B. And the reason is open protocol, software available, lots of providers. And then the last commandment, aside from having choice from provider, being able to take your data with you, having the software available, the software must be open. Because how would you otherwise know what this stuff is doing? I mean, going back to who of you runs Windows 10? Okay, all 2 of you? That's actually good news. But I find it quite scary. Because if you look at the network, what Windows 10 is doing is there is a humongous amount of network traffic coming from your Windows box. It's all encrypted, so we don't know what it's doing. And as a consumer, you can't shut it off. You can mute it a little bit, but you can't shut it off. That's scary. And there's no way for us to look anywhere what's happening. Now, another reason why open source software works so well, and even the NSA builds all their stuff on open source software, is because you know what the hell is going on. When this whole Huawei discussion that we're having these days, right? Hardware. It's even harder to see what hardware does because you're seeing nothing, more or less. Even an electron raster microscope cannot really look at the hardware. Of course, if all the hardware design was open too, right? And you push it into a chip factory and you have your chips burnt on the open design, that would be different. So going one level deeper, that would be my 5th commandment, but I don't dare to say that really yet, right? Would be to also base everything on open hardware. Then we know what the hell is going on. Right now we don't. And we build all our networks, all our infrastructure on proprietary hardware, and much of it on proprietary software. And that is really scary because we don't know what's going on. We just don't know. And if we digitize everything, of course, the whole world will be run off that stack. Now, that's the opportunity, I think, and it's funny that Nico also had the Europe flag at the very end, right? So I have the same. With a little modification, I put my open internet stack in the middle. I think for us to, in a way, catch up with China and Silicon Valley, but also, in a way, bring back or initiate maybe the next evolutionary step of this industrial revolution. From Henry Ford to to BMW, Mercedes, and Porsche. Right? If we want to do that for the internet, I think this is the way to go. We just counter with open, trusted, federated, permissionless services. So for example, one very concrete example that came to my mind very recently when I was reading about Mercedes, VW, and BMW teaming up for developing autonomous driving. Because they are a little behind in that curve, because the Teslas and Waymos of this world were a little earlier to the game. They decided, okay, each single company cannot do it by themselves, so we have to huddle up together. Now, please, guys, do one more thing. Do it with open source and create an open source automated driving stack that everybody can put in any car and that is totally transparent, and that does not collect my driving data. And of those ideas, I guess there's plenty more out there, lots of opportunity for you all to differentiate, the game, to play a different game than the incumbents, which creates disruption. And the model for doing that is based on open source, federation, and permissionless services. Thank you.